All right. Why don't we start with introductions, then I'm going to flip through some of the slides you guys gave me, and we can kind of jointly talk about them and then just have discussions. So, Sandy, you want to start?
Thank you, Chuck. Yeah, I'm Sandy Casey. I am the SVP of Global Supply at InnovateMR. I've been in this industry for 20 years. Chuck and I were laughing earlier. I started out at Greenfield Online, and I said, there's nothing like feeling old when you ask people around here, do you remember Greenfield Online? And they go, who? Anyways, I've been in the industry and really have worked in supply for many, many years on a global level, and I'm absolutely thrilled to see the associations coming together. And I thank you, Melanie, I thank you, Rachel, and everyone for making these efforts. It's so important what we're doing here, so thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Vignesh. I've been in the industry for 12 years, so I'm catching up, but it just depends on how long you're going to be around. Yeah, I've been in the industry since 2010. I was actually part of the first SampleCon as well. Worked for Lucid, and of course Lucid's now being sold, so I'm on the same boat as you, Sandy. And I started Research Defender about 4.5 years ago. So.
Hi everyone, my name is Cornel Bursuc. I'm head of product for Make Opinion. I'm in the industry for about 15 years, and I just moved from the buyer side on the supply side, so that's new for me. Nice to meet everyone.
Okay. So Cornel, you provided me some slides that look like they're kind of personas. You wanted to talk a little bit about respondents and some of the outcomes, right? So.
Absolutely. So at Make Opinion, we are proud to be obsessed about respondent experience. So that's why we think it's critical whenever we have a conversation about bad actors in the industry, whenever we talk about fraud and the measures that we take against fraud, well, what is the impact that we have for the good respondents, right? Because we need to consider that as well. And when you think about the impact for good respondents, sure, we're going to talk about conversion, how many respondents actually complete surveys, but it's also about understanding and measuring the impact on the respondent engagement. It's not just about the conversion. So what we did at Make Opinion, we started and we did a deep dive analysis in what we call pre-survey experience. And we try to understand, like everyone says the respondent experience is bad, but what does that mean? Like how bad is it? So we basically did two things. First, we tried to understand and summarize 1 month of activity for a regular respondent. So let's talk about Dean, right? Dean, it's a regular guy. He has kids. He has a job. And he's taking surveys. Okay. So what's his activity? What are the metrics that shows what Dean feels in the day-to-day survey-taking experience? The first thing that we take a look at is the number of platforms Dean is hopping in the pre-survey experience, even before he's touching the client survey. And in average, we saw that every respondent jumps across 4 different platforms. And in each platform, Dean is exposed to the same pre-screening process, and he goes to quality checks in all platforms. So that's point number 1. Then we see, okay, in average, Dean does and completes 9 surveys. That's not bad. But in order to complete those 9 surveys, Dean is turned from 27 other surveys. That's the experience that we offer today to our respondents. 75% of survey attempts end up in a term status. Now, if you also take into account the LOI, like the length of interview for the surveys where Dean is being screened out versus the surveys where Dean is actually completing them, we actually see that the amount of time Dean is spending to complete a survey, it's equal to the amount of time Dean is spending being screened out. So we're basically wasting half the time of the respondents that are putting into completing surveys. And the last thing, again, in the pre-survey experience, the pre-screening questions, the qualifying questions are asked in every platform. So just doing like a super quick math with the numbers that are on the screen, like we realize that within a month, you have the average respondent that is telling us more than 100 times age and gender. Now, we heard the respondents last year practically begging us, stop asking us the same questions over and over again. But when you put the numbers to that and you realize that within 1 year, a respondent is telling us as an industry more than 1,000 times his age and gender, you cannot just ignore that, and you need to empathize with the words and the experience of those people. So this summarizes the activity of a regular average respondent. Okay. So the second thing we did, well, let's see how the onboarding experience looks like. Let's see if I just want to try taking new surveys.
Is that good?
So let's talk about Bella, right? She lives in Pasadena, and she's saying, okay, I want to try and take some surveys. Well, unfortunately, what we found out, the experience for new respondents, it's even worse. Well, it's a new user. It's the same pre-survey experience, right? But on top of what's happening for a regular respondent, you have every platform in the flow that has extra quality checks in place, right? It's a new respondent. I want to make sure that that respondent is good, he's not a bad actor. So I do have that extra quality check in there. On top of that, we also try to build as an industry that basic profile for new respondents that goes a bit beyond the basic targeting that you actually need for the first survey. So what's the end result for this? We saw in real cases of new respondents trying to take a survey and literally answering more than 40 questions before actually reaching the client survey. And that's the onboarding experience that we offer to our respondents today, 40 questions before you reach the survey. And there's a price to pay for that. I mean, we see like 66% of new respondents just give up to take surveys after 3 attempts. That's the price we pay today as a supply team for the quality measures that are taken across all the platforms. And let's be real, as a respondent, I don't know that I'm going through 1, 3, or 5 platforms. I only see that I'm getting asked the same question over and over again. So we're going to discuss solutions today, but I think it's important for us to keep in mind 2 things. First, what's the impact of the measures that we're proposing for good respondents? And how do we find a balance between the 2? And second, I really believe as an industry right now, we're at the point where we should be obsessed about having industry standards or metrics to understand how engaged a respondent is. And on top of that, we need to have a way to understand what is the level of engagement that we need for every individual survey out there. It can't be that the only criteria that we use is the LOI like we do today. So we need to consider what are the other objective criteria that we can identify and how do we use that. I think this is critical to keep in mind whenever we discuss solutions today. Now, with this, I really hope that the basic simple numbers, because it's nothing complex, it's nothing out of the ordinary, but I think I really hope that this gives everyone a better perspective and insights. What's the experience that we're offering as an industry today for respondents? And maybe even more important, what's the onboarding experience? How do we keep the volume of good respondents to provide us with their time? Thank you.
Very good. Vignesh, you'd sent me over, I guess, like 4 points that we might want to discuss, right? So,
Yes. So here, actually going back to one of the slides that you put on first, which is in 2013, you were talking about the data quality and fraud. And I would say there have been a few things that have changed. One thing specifically is the conversation around privacy was not as high as it is today, right? Yeah. Because 2015, 16, I think, is when really the European laws started to kick in, and then, of course, the American laws started to kick in. And the change here is that there's a real fundamental tension between privacy and fraud. The more you know about someone, the less privacy they have, obviously, but you can tell whether or not they're a fraudulent person on a higher, with a higher confidence. Versus on the other side of the spectrum, the less you know about someone, the better their privacy is. However, the less you can tell about their intent. And I would say the hardest thing that we're facing today is the intent of a human being, right? So fortunately, that is still something that's hard to get. So I don't know, for example, like when I walk out here, I don't know if I'm going to take an Uber, I'm going to take a Lyft, I'm going to go for lunch. I don't know about that myself, right? So it's much harder for someone to know my intent. And ultimately, if someone is having some privacy settings, if someone is having some odd settings that they may trigger a fraud alert, the hardest thing to say is why are they doing that, right? Is it just happenstance that they are a programmer and they were invited to a survey? Or is it the fact that they are actually trying to defraud the system? So I think human intent continues to be really hard to gauge. And as such, that adds a challenge, especially as the laws come through. Secondarily, as the prices have compressed, the pool that we're so-called fishing from continues to be consistent, right? Because as you can imagine, any industry can only grow based on the pricing that is coming through. So if the pricing pressure is consistent, what starts to happen is that at the very best, you're flat, right? You're not growing your pool of respondents, which is not a good thing. So in this graph, and again, Chuck, thank you for the research. I think a few of you might have seen this slide as well before, is that as you get into super high activity, and super high activity is very, very subjective. I won't even say anything about it because different people have different rules about what high activity is, so I'm not going to say what I think it should be. But as you go towards the right side of the slide, you will see that the data quality pretty much completely collapses, right? There is nobody who is taking dozens and dozens of surveys who is able to give any attention, and it is completely collapsed. However, on the left side of the equation, the fewer surveys, generally speaking, someone takes, the better the quality is, right? But even then, you can see there's differences, right? It is not a smooth line, it's not linear, and I think that comes back again to the human intent of why someone is taking a survey. So I would say that while the conversation has been repetitive over the last 10 years, I would say there are definitely things that have changed. One is pricing pressure, which stops the industry from growing from a respondent pool perspective, and also the fact that you have far more privacy conversations, which is making it harder to delve into someone's intent, or you got to live with the false positives, right? So those are the two choices. And again, I'm not here today to make a decision for you, but those are choices that you'll have to create for yourself.
Okay. And then you had a couple points on some trends around fraud.
Yeah, actually, yes, I forgot about this. So one thing that I'd say, and I know we're running out of time here. So firstly, I will say the good news, if you will, is that the fraudsters are not sophisticated. They are not cryptographers. They have very basic, automated tools. What they are, though, is they're very, very tenacious. So they will find the least path of resistance, right? It's like flowing water. It'll just find a way to go somewhere. They're not that sophisticated, right? And I think a lot of, especially on the supply side, they would agree. They're looking at links. If there's a link that's open and not encrypted, they will hit that again and again. They are not cryptographers. They're not going to break anything. So with standardization, I was glad to hear, Melanie and Rachel talk about that earlier. With standardization, we can definitely beat them, right? But again, the key word there is standardization. And that would help with the respondent experience as well. And then I don't think I need to say this word anymore because I've heard it all and I'm sick and tired of it, and I think everybody here is sick and tired of it, which is the so-called ghost completes. Again, unencrypted, open links, guess what's going to happen? If I can go to a website and click www.survey.com status equal to complete, and that earns me 30 cents, I'm going to sit there and do that all day, right? I'm going to do that all day, every day. It is very easy. It is not sophisticated. So standardization is key to solving this problem.
Great, thank you. Sandy, you want to talk about some issues that you guys have seen? And
Sure. I mean, we all know fraud is an issue, and I think there's a few things that we have to sort of think about. When you have a problem in your life, you have to go back and understand what is the thing that created the problem? Where did it start? What was sort of the impetus of the issue, whatever that issue is? And when we talk about fraud, what I have seen as a major issue and a starting point of fraud coming in is really online currency. We've made it so easy for people to come in from other countries and get paid to participate in surveys. And we have to get a little bit creative. We have to think outside the box as a solution. You have a problem, what's a solution? We have to think outside the box a little bit and say, okay, I understand online currency. It's easy, it's fast, it's cheap for me to do it. But do something different. Think about incentives that are only in the market where you're doing your study. Go back to checks with your panel like we do. For first redemption, a check. You're really proving that person to be there and build a moat around yourself by making incentives appropriate to the culture and hard to get from another market. Hard surveys are getting done, which is great, but we just have to pay more attention to them. They pay more money, they're more attractive. It's the shiny object for the cheaters. And the other thing that's going on right now, and I'm really looking forward to this with the associations, there's such an education going on out there. There's hundreds of people teaching other people how to cheat us. And they're in a platform where these platforms are making billions of dollars of advertising, billions. But in this same platform where they're making that money, these people are skeezing the system to goof up the data in the same platform where all this advertising dollar is being spent. So we have to think about something. How do we stop this? How do we stop that content from being spread across the entire internet in any media place and content provider? So that's point one. I would say next, checks and balances constantly. Know who your bad people are, one. Two, know who your good people are. Know the good ones and treat them better. How many good people can't get into a survey because so many bad people filled it? So just know the good ones, know the bad ones, identify them and block them. How they operate. We did some interviews. I don't know how many people in here saw Rich and I worked on it with Vignesh too. Interviews we presented at SMR last fall, and the interviews were real fraudsters, and they told us how they do it. They've got bot farms. They have 25 devices that are completing the same survey over and over and over and over. They're making money. They're making $2,500, $3,000 a month. That's a lot in Venezuela, a lot. They're doing 3,000 surveys a month. We can find ways to block that. We can find ways to get a little bit more secure. And again, I go back to the education piece. When you think about, YouTube is out there, as other channels are, telling people how to come in and hurt our data. Now here we do a lot of stuff, right? We all do a lot. We're trying to block. We're trying to block, 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 block. Everyone's doing everything in here at one point or another. We're sharing a lot of information. But I think as we look at the associations and we're looking at coming together, I think we all have to look at each thing and break them apart and not just share in these places that something's going wrong, but what went right, what helped, what's really creating the impact for blocking out the quality and all the stuff we do. And so we talk about responsibility. What I'm so grateful for is, as part of the DIIs with Insights Association and so forth, everyone is really stepping up. It's fantastic to see the people coming in saying, it's across the industry, it's the client protecting their links, it's the supplier, it's all of it. And hearing clients, when they understood the cost of the ghost completes, I don't know how many people even understand the millions of dollars that get lost from small companies that supply us with good quality data when the ghosts happen. And the reason it happens is we're in a situation where we're maybe not checking the data frequently enough. So when you have someone who gets a complete on March 1st, and that person then can be removed out of that survey April 29th, in that time frame, that responder who was bad got paid an incentive. Someone had to pay a publisher. Tons of money was lost. And we can't let that happen to the supply ecosystem, because if we lose those people, we won't get a lot of our work done. So being more careful, being more timely, let's check the surveys more frequently. Let's think about everyone in this ecosystem, in this industry. We can all really make a really solid impact. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, we've got just a few minutes before we start the next panel. Why don't I ask you guys in 30 seconds or so, one or two things, if there's such a thing as low-hanging fruit, what do you think we ought to really focus on first? What's the easiest thing to attack? You want to start, Sandy?
Sure. It's the first thing I mentioned. I think incentives is absolutely key.
Okay.
I think sending out a check makes someone have to be at that address, so it's a real person getting a real tangible reward. And then if you can't do that, in some markets, checks just don't work. Just understand the culture, and if you're using a virtual incentive or Tremendous or Tango, whoever you're using, find out what gift card is in that market and only offer that.
That's good. Okay.
I'll go with a simple non-technical one, which is that it is a fairly fragmented industry, obviously, right? There are many, many suppliers, exchanges, marketplaces, and buyers, and then, of course, you have the brands on the other side. Please talk to your partners and provide the problems and the solutions. There is a lot of conversations around this right now, and I think this is the best time to have that conversation because people will listen. And it could be as simple as, hey, look, these links need to be encrypted, right? If they're encrypted, ghost completes will go away. Yep. Just one sentence, if those links are encrypted, the ghost completes will go away, right? It's as simple as that, so definitely bring that up, push, and I think the more noise we make around these things, eventually it gets done. And by the way, many of these are free, right? Like the encryption is free, it's not a cost. Yeah. So I would just say use this opportunity in March 2023 to have that conversation.
Cool. Cornel, how about you?
From my point of view, it's metrics. What does it mean that the quality is bad? We need to have standards. We need to have something to compare against. And it's both in terms of evaluating the engagement of the respondent, but I think, and I strongly believe this is missing today, is how do we know the level of engagement that we need in each individual survey? Because you're going to need different level of engagement based on the differences that you have in the survey. If you have a survey that requires respondents to open up their webcam, you're going to need a totally different level of engagement if you have a 25-minute survey that is just repeating the same questions for different brands. So we need to put those together and to have the right level of expectation for the people that are going into that survey.
Yeah, good. Boom, we're out of time. So gonna go ahead and do one more panel. I guess we're gonna kind of have to hold questions. And then, as we get into the breakouts, we'll have plenty of opportunity to discuss everything here. So, all right, thank you guys, appreciate it.